Andrew and Mary had a strong and steady marriage, having tied the knot back in their college days. Over time, they built a life together and welcomed 2 daughters. Mary chose to stay home to raise their children and manage the household, a task that wasn't always easy, but she handled it with dedication. However, one habit from her teenage years remained unchanged: her weekly gatherings with her closest friends. Sometimes, Andrew took care of the kids, while other times, the grandmothers stepped in. The group usually met at a cafe or, on occasion, at one of their homes. Hosting at someone's house had become less common as their lives grew busier with families and children. Still, their tradition of meeting once a week remained unbroken. One particular Saturday, as usual, they made plans to get together. Katie volunteered to host, since her husband was out of town helping his parents with their home. Among the group, Katie was the only one without children, making her home the go-to spot for gatherings. Excited, she retrieved a couple of bottles of wine from the fridge and waved them playfully with a grin. As the drinks flowed, so did their conversation, growing more animated with every passing moment. Katie, in particular, seemed to radiate excitement. The others quickly took notice and pressed her about what was making her so visibly elated. It was exactly the reaction she had anticipated. Blushing slightly, Katie revealed that she had been engaged in an affair for quite some time, with a younger man, a college student. She downplayed it, insisting it was nothing more than a casual fling to keep things interesting. With another sip of wine, she launched into details, boasting shamelessly about her secret romance. "And your husband? He has no idea?" When the friends asked, wide-eyed, Katie waved a dismissive hand. "Tony? Who cares? He's always busy with work or traveling. It's not like he really notices me anyway." Most of the women reacted with curiosity, leaning in as Katie recounted her escapades. But Mary remained silent, her expression shifting from shock to deep disappointment. Unlike the others, she actually knew Tony. She was aware how tirelessly he worked, often taking on extra shifts to support Katie's lifestyle and fulfill her every wish. And yet, here was Katie, treating the affair as though it was just another trivial indulgence. The weight of the conversation sat heavily on Mary. She could feel frustration bubbling within her, making every minute feel unbearable. Desperate to escape the negativity, she quietly counted down the moments until she could leave. When she finally arrived home, Andrew immediately noticed her pale and unsettled expression. Later that night, as they were getting ready for bed, he gently asked what was wrong. She hesitated, but eventually sighed, unable to hold it in. "One of my friends just admitted she's been seeing a younger guy behind her husband's back for a long time, and he has absolutely no clue." Andrew's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Wow," he said, taken aback. "Let me guess, Samantha?" Mary scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Be serious. Samantha has 3 kids. She barely has time for herself, let alone an affair." "Then who?" he pressed. Mary tightened her lips, clearly unwilling to reveal the name. Andrew picked up on her reluctance and tried again. "Natalie? Enough with the guessing. Just go to sleep," she muttered, turning her back to him. A moment of silence passed before Andrew spoke again. "Katie." Mary froze. That pause was all the confirmation he needed. He didn't say another word, simply rolled onto his back and closed his eyes, feigning sleep. But now his mind was racing. He didn't know Tony personally, but he had heard plenty from Mary. He remembered her mentioning how Tony had faced work challenges the previous year, and how Andrew couldn't wrap his head around it. How could Katie risk her entire family over something so trivial? Frustration simmered within him. Infidelity was a particularly sensitive subject for him, though he'd never shared that with Mary. Years ago, when he was much younger, he had been betrayed by a girlfriend. Even with the passage of time, the sting of that betrayal had never completely faded. He still felt indebted to his brother, who had warned him before things spiraled out of control. But then again, Andrew wondered, what did too far even mean? In the end, the truth, no matter how painful, was always better than living a lie. He tossed and turned for nearly an hour before finally drifting into a restless sleep. The next morning, he awoke with a sense of resolve. He had to find a way to get in touch with Katie's unsuspecting husband. He knew Mary wouldn't be thrilled, but that didn't deter him. He spent the day discreetly gathering information about Tony's whereabouts. That evening, Andrew casually steered their conversation toward Mary's friends and their husbands, subtly leading it toward Katie's situation. Mary quickly caught on and tried to dissuade him. "Please don't get involved," she warned. "You don't want them blaming us for this." Andrew frowned. "So you're okay with what she's doing behind his back?" "Of course not." Mary shot back. "But I just don't think we should be the ones to expose it. Put yourself in Tony's position for a second. Wouldn't you want to know?" Andrew pressed. Mary fell silent, her eyes dropping to the floor. It was clear she had imagined how devastating it would be to go through what Tony was unknowingly enduring. After a long pause, she hesitantly muttered Tony's name and mentioned where he worked. The very next day, Andrew made his way there. Calling Tony first would be pointless. He'd likely dismiss it as a prank. No, this had to be done in person. After waiting nearly 10 minutes in the reception area, a confused Tony finally emerged. Andrew introduced himself and got straight to the point, laying everything out for him. He left the decision in Tony's hands, but secretly hoped the man would do what needed to be done, leave his unfaithful wife. Tony stood frozen, stunned by both the revelation and the stranger standing before him. He shifted uneasily, his hands twisting together. He didn't seem like the type to act impulsively, and Andrew worried he might not take any action at all. But at least Andrew had done his part. As they parted ways, Tony quietly shook Andrew's hand and thanked him. A week later, it was time for Mary's next gathering with her friends. Andrew found himself unusually eager for her return, curious to hear if the fallout had begun. Normally, he only half listened to her updates, but tonight he was all ears. When Mary finally walked the door, she was fuming, her face streaked with tears. "He didn't just sit there after your little visit," she said, her voice trembling. Tony confronted her. He told Katie he knew everything and asked for a divorce. Andrew's lips curled slightly. Justice had been served, but Mary wasn't done. "She somehow convinced him to forgive her," she continued, shaking her head. But then she started interrogating everyone, trying to figure out who ratted her out. And guess what? They figured out it was me. "So why are you crying?" Andrew asked, rubbing her shoulder gently. "Because she kicked me out of the group right then and there." Mary sobbed, and the others took her side. They said I broke girl code and that I was just jealous of her perfect life. She dissolved into fresh tears. Andrew exhaled and pulled her into a hug. "Honestly, good riddance. You don't need friends like that. Let Katie deal with the mess she created. You did the right thing." Mary sniffled, her breathing finally steadying. They sat there in silence, wrapped in each other's arms. Andrew hoped they could put the entire ordeal behind them soon enough. But Tony had other plans. One weekend, out of the blue, Tony called Andrew. "You know," Tony began, his voice steady but laced with emotion, "you were right. I tried to pretend everything was fine, but I can't live like this. I can't live like a fool. So I kicked her out. I refused to spend my life carrying this burden." A deep sense of satisfaction washed over Andrew. Justice had finally been served. And while Mary had lost her old group of friends for good, Andrew didn't mind one bit. As far as he was concerned, the strength and integrity of their own marriage mattered far more than keeping ties with people who would defend a cheater.